Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building, forcing a lockdown and suspending the vote to confirm Joe Biden as the next U.S. president. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. It has been a chaotic day in Washington, D.C. as members of the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate gathered to certify the U.S. presidential election. But that process was interrupted when Trump supporters stormed the steps of the Capitol building. The building was put on lockdown as police attempted to secure the building and move lawmakers to safety. Earlier, President Trump addressed the crowds, repeating claims of a stolen election. CGTN's Nathan King is covering it all from Capitol Hill. He's joining us by phone now. Nathan, set the scene for us. How was it possible for these rioters to manage to enter the Capitol building?
I'm glad you used that word because it's exactly what it was. It was rioters. These are not protesters. And these were not the majority, by the way, of the Trump supporters at all. This was definitely several breakout groups, you could tell. And basically this is what happened. Shortly before 2 o'clock local time here in Washington, D.C., we were just preparing for our live shot, and we saw a lot of Trump supporters coming up from the White House after President Trump had given his defiant speech, basically defiant against reality, but also really whipping up his supporters. And they marched along Pennsylvania Avenue and up Capitol Hill, only a 15-minute walk if you're healthy. And essentially, the state Capitol Police, the Capitol Police, were just not ready for them. And they walked literally past the barricades and started going up the steps. Now, it looked like for a moment they'd been contained, but people were able to make it into the building, as you've seen those awful scenes in there. The joint session of Congress, which normally just rubber stamps this thing every 4 years, counts the electoral college votes as is in the Constitution, essentially had gone into a debate about Arizona because some senators had complained about it, as we've been reporting all week would happen. But that was suspended too. And essentially they run amok in the Capitol. Now, there was one incident, a shooting incident. We don't have the full details, so I don't really want to go into that, Mike, right now. But what I can tell you is the atmosphere outside, I was literally outside those steps, was awful. There was a lot of people screaming at us, "Can you hear us now?" Repeating a famous meme from a commercial here in America. Can you hear me now? Very, very angry, very, very violent. This idea that somehow storming the Capitol would stop the process of Joe Biden, president-elect, becoming president in 2 weeks. Even after Vice President Mike Pence has said, look, it's my constitutional duty to basically okay what the states have decided already. And it got just worse and worse. And there were very few law enforcement. The contrast was so stark. We covered the Black Lives Matter protests. You saw how many federal agents were on Washington, D.C. streets. The police presence was so thin and so late to arrive that these hardcore protesters, rioters, seemed to basically have the upper hand for the good part of an hour. And I can tell you it just got worse and worse from there on in. There were reinforcements, but we felt threatened all day verbally. Well, I'm used to that, being a member of the media with Trump over the last 4 years. But actually, the reason I'm talking to you on the phone right now is because they overran our media position and totally destroyed all our camera equipment.
Oh, boy. The city now under curfew. The National Guard has been called in. Is that making a difference? And as you know, Nathan, it seems like when it gets dark here in the city, when you have certain elements in this city, things get really dicey.
Yeah, they can do, but during the Black Lives Matter protests, there were some dicey moments. But let's face it, there wasn't the sort of full-scale violence that was spun by the White House into some sort of the city is out of control. But can I tell you, after a tumultuous year in Washington, the last 24 to 48 hours are more like that than I've seen. We've had Proud Boys facing off with police last night. And today's demonstration and riots outside the U.S. Capitol and inside the People's House, as it's called, shows no respect for one of the most venerable institutions in American politics. The fact that these people thought that they could storm it and somehow overturn the will of the people while still being citizens of this country and having voted is quite incredible. Over 20 years I've been in this country. Lived in Washington, D.C., New York, and I've never seen anything like it. I mean, the world must be looking at us and saying, this is just incredible. And it's the sort of thing that the U.S. criticizes all the time. Now, of course, Joe Biden, President-elect, called for calm, asked the president to do something. He did come out and say, go home, but he didn't. He continued to fan the flames of a fraudulent election with no actual proof. And it just continues. Now, hopefully, as I was last there after they destroyed our camera equipment, they were police were dispersing the crowds, but still not a huge number of police. I didn't hear a helicopter in the sky until it started to go dark. So we'll wait and see. Let's hope that this curfew does keep people who have come in from many states to protest. And that's their right. They must be upset that Donald Trump won't be president. But to storm the nation's capital, to break equipment of the media, to intimidate people is just quite incredible. And I've not seen anything like it. And can I tell you, after covering Trump rallies in 2016, the vast majority of Trump supporters were absolutely wonderful, kind. Even if they disagreed with you, they were kind and very lovely people. This was completely different. I've never seen anything like it.
Well, Nathan, stay safe, and we'll continue to talk to you throughout the evening. For more on the U.S. political transition, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Decatur, Georgia via Skype is Bill Crane. He's the principal of CSI Crane and a political analyst. Also with us from Babylon, New York is Christopher Hahn. He's the host of the Aggressive Progressive podcast and the syndicated Chris Hahn radio show. From Washington, D.C., Christopher Harris is the executive director of unhyphenatedamerica.org, and Katie Barlow is the host of Words Matter podcast and the co-founder and co-editor of the D.C. Circuit Breaker. Bill, why don't I start with you? Because, earlier today around 1:15, my producer Holly Shepard and I were looking at our watches at 1:15. Okay, they're objecting to Arizona. By this time, we were figuring we'd be talking about Pennsylvania, but it stopped with Arizona. Although Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, did have a rather robust speech rebuking what was happening. Let's listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. They've all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever.
And speaking of damage, shortly thereafter, we saw things just totally unravel and that the House itself damaged by some of these protesters. What was your reaction watching it there in Decatur?
Shocked, dismayed, disheartened, and in some respects heartbroken that a president of the United States, regardless of whether I like him or don't, or voted for him or didn't, would encourage these acts of violence on our nation's capital, would basically say, just an hour or so prior to these rioters taking over the Capitol building, we will never surrender, we will never concede, we're not giving up, regarding his election. And then even when later asking on tape for them to essentially stand down, couching all of that in the election was stolen, I feel your pain, it's ridiculous. And as someone who has worked for a number of Republican candidates and causes over the years, I'm embarrassed, and I don't know where the GOP goes from here. I am proud of my good friend and older fraternity brother, Mitch McConnell, for finally strapping on a pair and speaking somewhat directly to the president of the American people and softly in his own way saying enough is enough, and we need to move on with the business of confirming Joe Biden as president-elect.
But Bill, McConnell had urged his caucus not to do this, not to object. He said it was dangerous. He was right. Do you think Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, some of these other senators, are still going to go forward with their objections?
I don't know that any of those 14 senators expected this, but I do think that the White House and the president's campaign have been planning some of this for days. The president's been talking about, just you wait for January the 6th, just you wait for all of the craziness. And then in the phone call to our Secretary of State here in Georgia over the weekend, pressing them to essentially flip the electoral delegates of the state of Georgia by changing the results of the election after the fact. It was clear that I think they were trying to get another way to shut down the electoral certification. They probably had a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And when Vice President Pence said he wasn't going to throw delegates out, then the next possibility was storm the Capitol building, caused them to be fearful, because he's done very well with fear in this presidency, and shut this process down, which in effect he's done. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I do know that we back-time the inauguration 2 weeks off this certification. So if they don't get it done by midnight tonight, it doesn't have to happen, by the way, in the Capitol building. So perhaps they could go to Camp David or up a road a little bit into West Virginia to complete this process if they can't secure the Capitol building, so that on January the 20th, 2 weeks from now, we can inaugurate the next president.
Katie, I know you weren't watching this in Decatur because I've looked at your tweets. You were kind of had a bird's eye view to all of this. Describe your day for us.
I started the morning covering the rally by the Washington Monument and the White House. The president's children spoke, some staffers spoke, the president himself spoke later on, which then encouraged a number of individuals to go up to the Capitol. This morning was peaceful. To your reporter Nathan's point, the Trump supporters were kind, willing to talk to the media, generally peaceful and just frustrated with the results of the election. They weren't rioting. That shifted dramatically after the president gave his speech to those supporters, and they started marching up the National Mall to the Capitol Hill. And that's when they started to take over the Capitol, to breach the perimeters around and inside the Capitol. And by the time I got to the Capitol, it was swarming with rioters. There is an inaugural platform that's built right now in front of the Capitol. It's generally cordoned off during this couple of months before the inauguration happens to keep it safe. And the rioters took over the inaugural platform. They were hanging Confederate flags over the platform and blaring their whistles and touting their horns and generally rioting on the Capitol grounds.
Katie, our reporter Giles Gibson was out there last night reporting on some of the speeches given by Roger Stone and others. They were using words like battle and war. Trump said earlier today, you have to fight much harder. It seemed like they were getting ginned up. Could you sense a change in mood before all of this took place?
Absolutely. There was a huge shift in mood, and they started chanting things about having a civil war, being angry generally. I passed a couple of passerbys saying they were so grateful and so glad that the rioters took over the Capitol. They needed this to be able to have momentum today. And a number of his supporters truly believed that President Trump would remain in office and they would be able to prevent the Electoral College from voting. But I will say this, no matter what happens with the Electoral College vote, by virtue of the Constitution at noon on January 20th, President Trump's term ends no matter what. It's in the Constitution. It's over at noon. So there's nothing they can do about it.
Christopher Harris, let me ask you about these Republicans coming forward to support Trump and challenge, these states like Arizona and others. In fact, that's where we're stuck right now at Arizona. It didn't go past that. In fact, Paul Gosar, a representative from the state of Arizona, was the first to stand up and object. Yeah. And yet he was elected in the state of Arizona. Why is it, it doesn't seem to make sense. Why would some Republicans win and yet it's rigged and the president loses? This argument seems to be lost.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that you guys are amazing to me. You're amazing because of the way you try to portray things and the things that you ignore. Talking about like the language that was used, the president's trying to gin up everyone. But yet, did you have anything to say when President Obama was using such divisive language, trying to incite people into violence, get in people's faces? When you had his Attorney General Eric Holder saying get in people's faces, none of you guys had anything to say about that. So you have no moral standing whatsoever to try to chastise anyone on anything. That's the first things first. But then let's talk about some names. See, because the people who breached the White House, we need to know their names. The White House, the Capitol building. Why were they not arrested? Let's see who they were. What were their names? Let's talk about one of the guys, Jake Angeli. How is it that people like myself and social media were able to find out some of the names of people who breached the Capitol building, but none of you know? So why don't we go and find Jake Angeli? Who is Jake? Jake is a paid agitator for Antifa. Right? Because if you look at all of the like one of your, was it Nathan or whoever your reporter said, yeah, when you look at Trump rallies, they've all been peaceful. There's been tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Americans, peace-loving, America-loving patriots, peacefully protesting. Not mostly peaceful like the mainstream media says as American cities burn, as the left burns, but real peace-loving American patriots. And you know what? Those people are only being represented by the 14 or so U.S. senators who said, you know what? I'm going to represent my people and object to this, because there's tens of millions, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 million Americans who know that this election was stolen. It was stolen. Everyone knows it. And one of the main things why people are angry, because they know their vote no longer counts.
All right, let me bring Chris Hahn into the conversation. By the way, there's absolutely no evidence of what you just said. These cases have gone before the courts. They've all been thrown out. But Chris Hahn, let me get your thoughts on what he's just said.
Yeah, so what he just said is lies. The president has been lying to these people. These people were incited by the president, and when the Congress confirms Joe Biden, excuse me, when the Congress confirms Joe Biden's electoral win tonight, they should stay in session and they should impeach this president, and John Roberts should be called over from the United States Supreme Court, and there should be a 5-minute trial over a barrel for this president tonight.
This is from the same people who tried to impeach him over
He should be removed from office tonight. This president, excuse me, sir. I waited while you lied. You'll wait now. Okay?
And you're lying right now.
The president of the United States has asked his supporters to do this. He said today that he would march with them to the Capitol. Of course, the coward did not march with them to the Capitol. He went back to the White House, probably had a peanut butter sandwich, and then watched the violence unfurl. There is a woman, excuse me.
Now, Christopher, we'll let you talk. Let Chris go. Let Chris talk.
Did he tell them to become violent?
There is a woman right now.
He didn't tell them to become violent. Okay. Because they're leftist agitators.
Excuse me. I don't know who you are, where you come from, what you think you know. You don't know anything. I don't know where they find guys like you. There's always one of you on these panels here. But let me,
Christopher, let Chris talk, please. Let him just talk. Let him finish his thought. We'll let you come back into the conversation. But let him finish. We'll let you talk.
Look, man, I worked in the United States Senate for the incoming Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer.
I don't really care.
Okay? And I've never seen anything like this. The 14 senators that have supported this ridiculous farce. The blood of the woman who died today is on their hands. It's on Donald Trump's hands. The embarrassment of this country that we are facing around the world right now is on President Trump's hands, because he's been lying to his supporters, including people like this guy on this panel right now, who have believed everything that he has said. It is all patently false. He is the worst human being ever to hold this office, at least in my lifetime or in the last 100 years. And it is time for the United States Congress. It is time for the United States Congress to take definitive action. Mike Pence should be president by the end of the day tomorrow.
Let me pick up on what Chris just said, Katie. Let me bring you into the conversation, because former Republican Representative Barbara Comstock tweeted this afternoon, we need 25th Amendment action taken today. You're kind of our legal expert, so explain the 25th Amendment and how likely is that?
So basically, the 25th Amendment will allow for the removal of the President of the United States upon action of a cabinet member. I don't see that likely happening in the next couple of weeks. That would take a lot of organization, quick acting, and quick thinking. Yeah. We are seeing that certain congresswomen are drafting articles of impeachment. So that's also possible that it could happen on the floor of the House, an alternative mechanism for removing the president. There are multiple routes to trying to get President Trump out of office sometime in the next 14 days. But a lot of that will be distraction in the media at this point. It will take a huge amount of political effort and will to be able to get that done. And I don't see that if it hasn't happened at this point, I don't see that happening in the last 14 days. But that's also not to say that there won't be more rioting activity, inciting violence from the White House over the next 14 days, and there won't be motivation there to at least attempt to do it. But it will take a coalition within the president's cabinet to be able to successfully invoke the 25th Amendment.
Well, Katie, the 25th Amendment would not apply in this situation. It's there for the purpose of the president being incapacitated and not having his faculties. The only way to remove the president in this situation is impeachment and then trial and removal in the Senate. And that could happen today. if they really wanted to do it. And frankly, I've been hearing from a lot of people in D.C. who would love to see that happen, including people in the United States Senate. I don't know how many Republicans would go along. They would need to have, I think, at least 18 of them. So it's a far-flung idea, but quite frankly, this man is dangerous to this republic, and he needs to be removed right now. He wants to burn this place down, and it is ridiculous that we are allowing him to do it.
Bill, let me get your thoughts on what Trump had to say. People have been urging him, including the Republican minority leader in the House, McCarthy, had urged him to go on television, talk to his supporters, say, leave the Capitol. He finally did. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I know you're hurt, but you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt.
What did you make of his comments?
They were pathetic. He did not address those protesters in that fashion when he was urging them to take to the streets, to fight, to not concede. And those folks aren't sitting watching television. They were climbing the steps of the Capitol. They were climbing the sides of the building. They were breaking out windows, tearing into the Speaker's office, which has held Republican speakers and doing damage to artifacts. They are running through Statuary Hall, knocking Capitol Police over en route. And I don't know the detail on the woman who was shot and killed, but that blood, again, is on their hands.
Yeah.
It's impossible for me to I mean, those of us who've been around a while, the last time the U.S. Capitol building was under siege was 1812. It didn't even happen during the Civil War. President Lincoln secured Arlington, which was the home of Robert E. Lee and now Arlington National Cemetery, and had all the cannon battlements removed so that you couldn't fire on the Capitol building or Washington, D.C. The British burned the White House, the Capitol, and the Rotunda in 1812. And since that building was rebuilt as the people's house, it's not been attacked this way. I expect, unfortunately, on the backside, we'll see, as we already have around many state Capitol buildings, large fencing, perhaps electrified, to prevent this from happening in the past. What a loss for this nation.
It's a shame.
Bill, let me contrast that with President-elect Biden's comments. Let's listen to that, and I want to get your thoughts on the backside of that as well.
Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now.
Bill, contrast that with what Trump said.
More like a leader of America. And I didn't vote for Joe Biden, but more like what an American president should say. And to the gentleman who was screaming over everybody earlier, with, again, due respect, which he didn't give the other speakers on this panel, you wouldn't have seen this from Barack Obama. You won't see this from the next president of the United States. I can't remember anyone in modern history who would encourage people to assault Congress or the Capitol building. I don't know that we can get a 25th Amendment. There's no one strong enough in that cabinet left to take on this president. The vice president, thankfully, had the guts to say he wasn't going to reject electors. And do remember that that piece of business still does need to be conducted according to statute before we can inaugurate Joe Biden on January the 20th, hopefully after President Trump's term ends. So that piece of business needs to be completed. But the president-elect is correct. It was a small minority. It's not representative of America. And whether those protesters were Antifa or Proud Boys, we should follow the order of the mayor of the city of Washington, evacuate the area, continue to search for bombs and other things inside the Capitol building. They've had multiple bomb threats. And let anyone know who approaches the building in the next 48 hours, they'll be arrested and held until Congress has met and completed this piece of business.
And Chris, let me ask you this question. You used to work on Capitol Hill. You alluded to that. Charles Ramsey, who used to be the police chief here in Washington, D.C., was interviewed earlier today, and he said, this problem is not going to go away, and it won't go away on its own. Someone has to take control of this, and it won't be the guy at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Can the leaders on Capitol Hill do something to change kind of what we're seeing in the United States, what we're witnessing in the United States?
I think they have to take a page out of what happened in the early 70s when Republican leaders of Congress walked up Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House and told the president it's time to go. We won't have peace for the next 14 days with this man in office. He's too much of a spoiled child who is used to getting his way, and he has been rejected soundly by the American people. I think Mitch McConnell put it best today when he said this election wasn't close. He lost by almost 8 million votes, and he got the same, and Joe Biden has the same electoral college win as President Trump had 4 years ago. So there needs to be some decisive action by Congress right now. It needs to reassert itself in the name of this republic, and it needs to get that man out of the White House. And if he's not going to leave the White House, Congress needs to take some other action to kind of quarantine this president in his role for the next 14 days. And quite frankly, maybe they encourage him, if he's not going to resign, if they're not going to impeach him, encourage him to go to Mar-a-Lago and play golf for the next 14 days, take the plane anywhere in the country he wants to go, enjoy himself, and forget about this city, because we don't need him in Washington, D.C. anymore, and we surely don't need him on Twitter. Quite frankly, Twitter and other social media platforms should suspend his account. He is inciting riots around this country, and he needs to be quelled.
Katie, let me ask you this question. I've lived here in Washington, D.C. for 20 years. I was on my way to work and drove by the Pentagon the day that the jet went into the Pentagon. I never thought I'd see anything like that. I never thought I'd see what I saw on Capitol Hill today. What about the image of the United States, this superpower? What has this done? Has it tarnished the image of the U.S.? I mean, what does this mean for the U.S. going forward?
It's certainly tarnished the United States' reputation as a part of 4 years of tarnishing it from various behavior from this White House. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson today said basically that this behavior was abhorrent and that there needs to be a peaceful transfer of power. And that is frankly embarrassing to the United States, that the UK Prime Minister needs to tell us that we need to have a peaceful transfer of power. And he's not the only one. We are on the world stage right now, and we are supposed to be the beacon of democracy and freedom. And today, we were not that.
Well, if he is not encouraged to go play golf, how rocky are things going to be in the days ahead, Katie?
I think the next 14 days are going to be incredibly rocky. I think we need to look to leaders in the states, like the state of Georgia, who have steadfastly stood up to the president despite his lies, despite his attempts to overthrow and overturn the election results. They're members of his party. They're supporters of the Republican candidates that just lost in the state of Georgia, but they have transparently carried through our democratic processes. And so I think we need to look to individuals like those leaders in the coming days to get through these final 14 days before January 20th.
Well, I want to thank all our guests for joining us today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.